Hi, welcome to our Facebook Live. Today we're talking about crafting the perfect offer. It's getting to be closer to spring when we see a lot of buyers come out, and we're just going to hit some key points that we think are really important when preparing an offer, especially when you're in a multiple offer situation.
Good morning. I'm Beth Curtis with House of Brokers. Been a realtor here in our community for going on 24 years now. And I'm going to kind of share with you some of the tips that I've found through the years that I think are very effective for both the seller and the buyer in getting a win-win situation in a transaction. First of all, there's many different types of offers because there's different types of real estate that can be purchased. Everything from commercial to investment to land to single-family residential. We're going to specifically this morning talk about the single-family residential, and that's pretty much what our team specializes with. So there is a specific contract for this type of transaction, and we're going to kind of hit the high points, like Cheryl said, as far as making your offer the most effective. The spring market is typically the peak season of real estate, so therefore a number of new listings are going to come on the market. There are quite a few buyers that have been sitting waiting for the perfect home to come on the market. And so it's definitely a time where the multiple offer competing situation can certainly come into play. So I personally think to start the whole process, and keep in mind there's many facets of the process of a real estate transaction, so we're going to specifically hone in on crafting the offer side. With an offer, you do need to have some kind of pre-approval letter if you are going through a lender as far as financing the property. If you are capable of purchasing the home by cash, then you would need some kind of a bank letter to basically validate that you have adequate funds in the bank to back up your offer. A pre-approval letter is very simple to do. With modern technology, you can go online, place your application. It is highly advised to have a local lender if possible. Shopping rates and all that stuff is part of the process. However, having a local option can certainly pull a lot of weight with your offer, especially if you're in a competing offer situation. So with that in mind, you've looked at a number of properties, you found the one that you fell in love with, and keep in mind a lot of the process of buying a home is emotional. Even though it's financial, there's lots of emotional ties. And so when you find the perfect home, the first question people say is, well, how do I know this is the right one to write my offer on? If you've looked at what you feel is the adequate number of homes to view, and if this particular home got away from you and you would really be heartbroken, this is probably the one that you need to make your offer on. Not every home's going to be perfect, so you have to keep in mind if it hits all of the high points of your lifestyle, this is the one to make the offer on. So with that being said, price. Price is probably the biggest obstacle that people get tripped up on in presenting their offer. So if you're being represented by a realtor, which I think is highly advisable, they would do the research for you to find out what are the comparable sales in your neighborhood of the home that you're looking at and the surrounding neighborhoods. You would evaluate the style of the home, age, approximate square footage, all the added amenities, and then you would size up from the last 6 months, if possible, what the comparable sold data supported. If you have to go back a little bit further, you certainly can do that because some properties, there's just not that many sold comparables in the area to go off of. And you would craft your offer, and usually I would say coming in somewhere between 97 to 98% of your list price is a very fair assessment if the property is priced accurately to begin with. Sometimes if it's off the mark, then if you made a lower offer than that, you would basically provide your supporting documentation of why you're offering that with the documents.
And what happens if you're in a multiple offer situation with price? Because then it boils down to you're going to probably have to pay a little more and probably a little higher than it may even be worth, or be prepared to walk.
Be prepared for the next home in line. And a lot of buying real estate is supply and demand. That's why there's no hard and fast rule on the price. A lot of it depends on your time period you plan on living there, what the supply and the demand of the market has at that particular time. You certainly don't want to overextend yourself and purchase at a too high of a price, because then obviously, given the market conditions, you're going to have to stay in the property a lot longer and hope that it appreciates at the rate that it needs to appreciate in order for you to come out of it when the time comes for you to sell. So sometimes I have to say, unless it's just the perfect property and the perfect location with the perfect schools, and you don't have to do that many improvements to the property, you may be better off to walk and move on to the next property. However, if that home has every single feature that you just absolutely love, and you know you want to live out your story there and create your memories there, it might be worth it to you to spend a few extra $1,000s and beat out the competition, because that's where you want to be, and your happiness factor plays a big part in that. So that's where it's really kind of hard to decide the line between the emotional part and the financial part, because you certainly want to make a good decision, but you certainly want to be happy.
And time in the house does play a factor. I mean, if you think you're going to take a job transfer in 3 to 5 years, you're probably not going to want to take a gamble and pay more. But if this is going to be your forever home and you don't think you're ever going to move in the next 20 years, then that also plays a part in.
Absolutely. And the uniqueness factor of the property. If it's one of a kind, it sits in a central location, or it's on a piece of land, or there's something unique about the property, then there's always going to be probably more demand for that type of property, which then warrants a higher price. So from that aspect, you can determine where you want to place your offer. The one thing I do want to point out, though, is every buyer wants to get the best deal. No question about that, and rightfully so. There is kind of a fine line in the sand, so to speak, though, of offering too low if the market and the data really supports the price where it's currently listed at. Because some sellers are going to take great offense, and rightfully so, to a very low offer. So if it's one that you really want, it's one that you probably need to be very realistic on your starting place. Okay? So with that, it's like, what comes along with the property then when you're crafting your offer? Once you establish your price, where you want to start, then there's also lots of personal property that can sometimes get jumbled up in the process. I always kind of advise to kind of stick to the basics of the home first, throwing in extra pictures or refrigerators or extra things. I mean, you'd be amazed at what all people have asked for as far as, can this stay with the property? If the seller doesn't have any emotional tie to it, they'll sometimes leave it, no question about that. But on the other hand, if it's something that was a gift or something of sentimental value, it's probably unreasonable to ask the seller to leave something that truly is not intended to convey with the home. Would you not agree?
And sometimes the seller will put a lot higher price on something if there's a definite emotional attachment.
Yeah. And the lenders also, from their perspective, it does have to be noted in the contract that if a personal property item stays, that it clearly has no value, it's left at the convenience of the seller, and that there's no monetary ties to the contract with that property whatsoever. So with that then being said, is the earnest money that comes along with an offer. Earnest money is considered good faith with the intent of purchasing the home, barring that it's contingent upon your financing. You want to have a satisfactory inspection period, work your way through that. That's a whole other topic. We'll cover it another time. And then obviously the appraisal, that the property does need to come in at the appraised value. So earnest money, I think, is something that it's nice, I think, per every 100,000 to at least put up $1,000 to show good intent that you plan on purchasing. Sometimes you can do promissory notes. There's all sorts of creative ways with the earnest money portion of things. But I think the stronger that you can come in with your offer with a higher earnest money amount, it's certainly, if you're in a competing offer situation, going to stack you up higher than the competition. And the other thing to kind of think about too is when you're crafting your offer is not everything is based on the price with the seller. Much of the contract is about the terms. So if you know in advance, having some inside information by asking what would be the seller's preference in moving, many times the seller might be a little bit more flexible on some other parts of the contract if they get the ideal closing date that's going to fit what they need to sell their home, move on. Maybe there's another home that's in play for them, and kind of the domino effect. So,
because I think a lot of people think that, oh, if I can do a quick closing date, then that'll be ideal. But for some sellers, an ideal closing date is longer, so they have time to move on, get packed up. So it really depends on each personal situation on what type of closing date is actually more appealing to that seller.
And many times, especially going in the spring market, that especially holds true because the school year kind of dictates, if you have kids in school, when you can move and what's the appropriate timing for you to actually pack up the house and actually, move on to the next home. So definitely.
And typically, I guess closing dates, like like a faster close would be 30 days or less, but longer out, you're looking at like 45 to 60 days. So those are kind of the numbers that we typically play with.
And obviously a vacant home, one that's been on the market for a little while, the earlier that the seller can get that closed typically is going to be in your best benefit as well. Just because holding a property, even if it's paid for, it still has the expenses of holding costs that are involved. So it's certainly more enticing to get that moved off the market as quickly as possible. Okay.
So I know in the past we've been, and I know we've even dealt with this where we've been in multiple offer situations and we've come in with the best price, the best closing date, the closing date that the seller prefers, and we still didn't get it. And, it's boiled down to stuff like the other party has waived their right to do inspections. Kind of touch up on that. And
well, I think any property, unless you're an expert in that area,
are willing to take on the risk.
That's exactly right. It's the risk factor involved of just the unknown, because from the outside presence of a home, everything can be looking sharp, it's well groomed, well maintained, but you just don't know until you get into that mechanical side and the roof and the furnace and hot water heater and air conditioner and all the different expensive ticket items that can come into play. So I think that one needs to be cautious, I think, in waiving an inspection period personally. I really don't advise it. I think that asking for home warranties is definitely something that is very popular in our area that covers on the higher ticket items. And those are typically good for 1 year, can be extended by either, by the party. The seller can buy it, the buyer can buy it, the buyer can extend it. I've had some people that were willing to offer X amount of percentage over the price with a cap, so that whatever the highest offer is, they'll pay up to X percent over. That way, they would have an advantage. I've had some buyers that have had success with writing a love letter to the seller, so to speak, and that basically explains to them why they're passionate about their home. And that's where kind of the emotional ties come into play, because if a seller's lived in their property for very long, and if they've raised a family there or have strong ties to it or have done a lot of improvements to the property, there's an emotional tie to it. You've got some sweat equity and time in that property, and you want it to go to the next homeowner that appreciates what you've done. And every buyer will be a seller more than likely one day, so the buyer can relate to that, just that when you're on the other side of the table, you will appreciate the buyer appreciating your home and what you've done to it. And just the fact that another family type situation or individual or couple, whatever their status is, will move into the home and care for it as much as they have and live out their story there. So that's where kind of the emotional side of real estate really kicks in. And at the end of the day, the seller has the right to accept or reject any offer on the table. So that's why I think having all of your ducks in the row from the very beginning, coming in at a very fair price, having your financials all in order with all your supporting documentations to back it up. And then we get into the next section, which is kind of a reasonable inspection period where, and this is a time period to kind of assess the health of the home. It's not to go in and ask for the obvious things that you've already seen when you viewed the home. That should have been taken in consideration when you wrote your initial offer. So these are the things that might come up that are the unknowns. So keep in mind that, it's not a win-win for anyone if both parties are not willing to give and take and be reasonable with wanting to come to the outcome.
And it's not always highest price wins. There's a lot of variables that go into it.
No.
And knowing what's most important, the best variables to get you that.
Yes, because I've seen many sellers have taken a lesser dollar amount just due to other factors in the contract that felt better to them. So maybe they liked having the local lender better. Maybe they didn't like having somebody having a home to sell first with a contingency offer. Maybe it was a better closing date. Maybe it was because they were putting 20% down instead of doing 5% down. So they felt like it was a stronger borrower, even though there's 2 pre-approval letters with a very reputable lender sitting there on the table in front of them. It's what the seller connects to, and part of it is the advisement of their listing agent as well, if they have a listing agent involved. So,
and with that being said, anybody that is possibly looking at buying in 2018, we'd love for you to check out our website, check out the our buying process and kind of how we work with buyers. Marla's going to post a link in the comments so you guys can check that out. And we'd be happy to talk to you. You can give us a call at 573-864-5054 or check us out at bevandcohomes.com.
Yes, we do free evaluations with buyers to sit down and kind of visit about your process, see if it's a good connection. We also have buyer books that are either online or that you can take home with you. So
we have great resources for lenders, handymen, all kinds of people that you might need assistance with in the home buying process.
It's a big step in buying a home, and we certainly want you to buy the best one that's correct for you with the right terms, and we're here to guide you through along that process. So anything that we can do to make the process fun and easier for you, then we're all on board. So so if you're thinking about buying a home in 2018, we're your team.
And we'll see you guys next Wednesday at 9 a.m.
Yes. And we've got some very exciting news. We are going to be rolling out a brand new subdivision with Pate Jones Construction. So it's a stellar location. So you're going to want to definitely hear the details on this one. So join us next week for Breakfast with Bev at 9 a.m. and hear all the details.
Live at the site. So you guys will get to see firsthand. Hopefully we don't freeze.
Yeah, hopefully there's not a lot of snow on the ground. So, but we'll wing it, whatever happens. So,
all right. See you guys next week.
Thanks for tuning in.